bringing Ukraine and Belarus closer to Russia has always been within his narrative for a very long time, and that seems to be quite clear as to what he's doing. I don't think we're going to see the Soviet Union anytime soon. There's very little in terms of, there might be a few oddballs in the Kremlin who say, yes, let's bring back Uzbekistan or Azerbaijan. That's not going to happen anytime soon. Putin wants to bring back the so-called Slavic brotherhood, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, and to destroy NATO. So we might see something in terms of events in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, somewhere where he can show Article 5 is but a piece of paper. I think most importantly, we have to finally realize in the West that this war is not going to go away, that Putin is not prepared to negotiate. And if he's going to negotiate, it will be Ukrainian capitulation, or it will be a negotiation that the Kremlin will ignore in a few months' time, as they often have done in the past. This war is going to last a long time, and Donald Trump is I'm trying to be diplomatic and charitable to the man, but he's completely clueless if he believes that he can solve this negotiation. And if America walks away, there is a real problem. So the European governments need to be clued up on this. They need to realise this is existential for the West. They need to realise they are fighting a war, and they need to act now in terms of building up their military, in terms of supporting Ukraine, and in terms of trying to keep the Americans this side of the Atlantic in the foreseeable future. It's quite clear. I mean, even Donald Trump has finally admitted it, and he's been in a one-way bromance in regards to his relationship with Vladimir Putin for far too long. He's admitted that Putin doesn't want to end the war, that Putin believes he's winning the war, and this has been quite clear to everyone else apart from Donald Trump and some in the Republican Party for a long time. And we've seen it today as well, or yesterday, that the Russians were quite clear. Not only did they reject Donald Trump's so-called peace negotiations, which would have given Russia an awful lot more than Ukraine would have received, but they've also said that we're not just interested in the 4 territories plus Crimea that we hold. We want to create a buffer zone in Sumy, in Kharkiv, and elsewhere in order to protect Russian borders. But interestingly, we've also seen today, I believe, Sergei Lavrov and others saying, well, we need to protect Russian speakers in Ukraine from the Zelensky junta. So that goes further, that this isn't an end to the war, that Russia, or at least Russia under Putin, perceives that this war has to go on until so-called all the Russian speakers in Ukraine, and for the Kremlin, most Ukrainians are Russian speakers, they're just forced to speak Ukrainian. This will continue until they are protected by Russia, which would effectively mean Russian soldiers, and that these areas of Ukraine are annexed to Russia. So the war, for now at least, until the West gets its act together and sorts itself out, is going to continue for the Kremlin. There's a new statue that was there during the Soviet Union, and it's very much Putin trying to legitimate himself, seeing that Stalin, this perception of a great Russian leader, although he was, of course, Georgian, is very much where Putin tries to legitimate himself in terms of linking his regime to that of the Soviet greats like Stalin, and before him, the Tsars as well. It is a mishmash of what is known as red and white identities. You have the whites of the Tsars coming from the Russian Civil War back in 1917 to 1921, and the Reds, the Bolsheviks. So this is something that Putin has been trying to do for a long time, linking these two great pasts to legitimate himself in the present. I wouldn't necessarily say he's so desperate to revive the Soviet Union. I mean, we have to go back to his 2005 much quoted message in terms of the idea that those who don't miss the Soviet Union have no heart, those who want it back have no head. Putin doesn't want to revive, in my opinion, the Soviet Union, primarily because that would actually, he doesn't have the ideology of the Soviet Union, of communism. He's very much a great power sort of person, and the Soviet Union was the world's second great power during its heyday, especially under Joseph Stalin and possibly under Leonid Brezhnev and others as well. So that's what Putin is trying to promote, this idea of a continual Russian great powerness, if you want to call it that, through the Soviet Union and into the Tsars, all the way up to Kievan Rus, which was the proto, in Putin's mind, Russian state way back 1,000 years ago. I don't know if it's necessarily a way to deny Ukraine's sovereignty in terms of promoting Stalin. I mean, Stalin is vilified in Ukraine for the man who was behind the Holodomor, the famine in Ukraine. So I don't know if it's necessarily the trying to take away from Ukraine's identity. Ukraine doesn't perceive Stalin as a positive. Stalin and the Soviet Union, to a great extent, were an aberration for Ukraine, or at least for the Zelensky government, and before him, Petro Poroshenko and Viktor Yanukovych. So, Viktor Yushchenko. So, it is very much, I think, how Putin is trying to legitimate himself. And it goes back as well to what we're seeing with Russian rhetoric coming out with the war on Ukraine, or what is known in Russia as a special military operation. They're fighting the West, and Ukraine is the battleground. They're also fighting Nazism, personified in their perception of by Ukraine, which is a Nazi state, that Zelensky is the leader of a fascist Nazi junta in Kiev, and that Stalin was the leader who won the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, in the Russian historical narrative. And so Putin is trying to link himself to the great leader, i.e. Joseph Stalin. So I think this is very much part of this analysis. For most Russians, the 9th of May Victory Day parade and the run up to the 9th of May is the most important holiday for them, more so than Christmas, more so than New Year, more so than Easter. So it is linking this idea that Russia today is the great victor from the Soviet Union, that 80 years ago, the Soviet Union, or however long it is now, 85, that the Soviet Union won the war by itself, according to the Kremlin, and that therefore they are continuing this great civilizational move by defeating Nazism again after it's reared its ugly head apparently in Ukraine, and they're going to save civilization and the world by defeating Nazism. It is very much the idea of trying to link in the Kremlin's mind towards that great patriotic war narrative, and something that Russians are invariably proud of, and to an extent, understandably. Yes, the Red Army did some very bad things. Yes, the Red Army is not considered as the liberator in a lot of places, understandably so, but the Red Army did break the back of the Nazi forces. We have to admit that. So there is certainly this narrative that the Kremlin has played up on, and it is popular amongst Russians today.